Hi, it's Katrina. Number 10. Cleopatra's Underwater Palace. In the 5th century A.D., Alexandria, Egypt ran into a bit of a problem. A series of tidal waves and earthquakes hit the coast, destroying almost everything. The royal grounds, made up of great palaces, huge temples, shipyards, markets, and homes, were completely lost. What was once a bustling part of the greatest city in the world was now under the water. Among the royal grounds was Cleopatra's palace. The royal palace was once at the very edge of the city on low islands sticking out from the bay, and slowly crumbled into the bay over the years. Eventually, Cleopatra's palace was 20 feet below the surface. The artifacts and lost buildings have slowly been covered in the sediment of the sea floor. Modern Alexandria rose over the old Alexandria, and the royal quarters were buried for 16 centuries. It wasn't until recently that a famous underwater explorer by the name of Frank Gaudio began to reveal the secrets of this underwater world. From 1992 until today, Frank and his team have been busy pulling out some of the most unbelievable artifacts from the ancient Egyptian world. Somehow, in the murky, turbulent waters, Frank and his team managed to find the remains of Cleopatra's palace along with statues from a temple. The divers have retrieved almost perfectly preserved sphinxes, which acted as spiritual guardians. They have found columns and pillars, the massive stone gateway that led to the island where the palace once was, and even a granite head that is possibly Emperor Augustus. All kinds of artifacts have been pulled up from the sea, but more of it is still waiting beneath the waves to be salvaged. There is so much rubble from the old city of Alexandria that Egypt is now working on creating an underwater museum. It will be easier to bring tourists underwater than it would be to recover all the pieces of the destroyed ancient city. Number 9. The Cave of Disfigurement. In a submerged cave in Mexico, archaeologists recently discovered the skeleton of a woman who had been horribly disfigured when she died 9,900 years ago. Underwater archaeologists came across her spooky grave on the Yucatan Peninsula and have since identified the woman as one of the earliest known inhabitants of Mexico. Even more shocking than her age was the state of her skull. Scientists could easily tell that she had suffered at least 3 major injuries. Something hit her extremely hard, breaking her skull in multiple places. She also suffered from crater-like deformations all over her head, like the dents on the moon. Researchers believe these dents may have been caused by an extremely primitive case of bacterial infection related to syphilis. This woman clearly had a very difficult life, and according to lead researcher Wolfgang Stinsbeck, her life had ended in absolute misery. He believes that the woman was expelled from her tribal group for an unknown reason, perhaps because she was deformed. After she was expelled, she was then followed to the cave where she had taken up residence and brutally murdered. That's all just speculation, but it seems to fit with the archaeological evidence. The cave was eventually flooded, and almost 10,000 years later, a diver discovered her bones and brought them to the surface. Number 8. The head from the Antikythera shipwreck. If you're into ancient archaeology and unsolved mysteries, maybe you've heard of the Antikythera Mechanism, the oldest computer known to humans. It was found in the ruins of a shipwreck from 2,000 years ago at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. The mechanism is currently the oldest analog computer ever found, but it's pretty old news by now. The mechanism was found over a century ago, but just recently something very different was discovered at the exact same shipwreck. Researchers recently surveyed an entirely new section of the shipwreck. They didn't find any pieces of old supercomputers, but they did find the busted head of Hercules. It happened in 2022, over 120 years since the mechanism was discovered. Researchers uncovered the giant marble head of the mythological Greek hero and brought it back to the surface. Even more miraculous is that researchers say the head most likely belongs on the top of a headless statue which was brought to the surface by sponge divers in the year 1900. When all is said and done, there will be a larger-than-life statue of Hercules brought up from the Antikythera shipwreck. And on a slightly different note, the divers also discovered some human teeth inside the wreckage. They are hoping that by extracting DNA from the teeth, they'll be able to see exactly who the sailors were and what part of the world they came from. Sadly, we now have to wait until 2025, when the researchers from the University of Geneva will return to the ship for their next expedition. They believe that next time, they'll find even more mysterious secrets hidden underwater. Number 7. Ancient hunting bow. An ancient hunting bow nearly 500 years old was just found underwater in Alaska. Archaeologists are currently working to understand more about this fantastic artifact, which was found in Lake Clark National Park. It was an employee with the National Park Service that made the discovery way out in the backcountry. 2 feet underwater, the employee noticed a rather peculiar-looking stick. That stick turned out to be a wooden hunting bow, about 54 inches long, still totally intact. It was in such good shape that someone who knew what they were doing could have picked it up, restrung it, and used it in their next hunt. This ancient weapon is roughly 460 years old. It could have been built as far back as 1506. But what's really mysterious is that nobody knows where it came from. The antique weapon was discovered on Dena'ina lands, which once belonged to an indigenous group who lived all across Alaska. The weird part is that the bow doesn't appear to match Dena'ina craftsmanship. Experts believe the bow actually came from the Alutiiq people or the Yup'ik people. What they're trying to figure out now is how a bow crafted by a group of people who lived in a totally different part of North America wound up at the bottom of an Alaskan lake. And now for number 6. But first, I want to give a big shout out to Joseph Spear and Hassan Genserler. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family. Number 6. Roman amphorae. A dive conducted off the coast of Italy in 2018 revealed some fascinating ancient wine vessels. European researchers brought jars from the days of the Roman Empire that had been used to hold the precious elixir of wine back to the surface. These jars date back to the 2nd century BC and are known as amphorae. This is the name for the double-handled jars used in ancient days to hold everything from olive oil to wine. 3 different vessels were discovered under the water. One with a high and thin neck from the 2nd century, another with a larger and rounder body from the 1st century, and a third that was found to contain pine resin coating. It's the pine resin coating that made the discovery so exciting. Initial analysis showed that the Romans used wood tar to waterproof the inside of their wine containers, as it was better for storing both red and white wine. The researchers then looked at the wine itself, matching pollen and plant tissue with wine still made in Italy today. Even after 2,000 years, almost nothing has changed in the world of Italian fine wines. These containers were found at the location of what archaeologists believe to be a submerged Roman port. This place has no name, but was likely the production site for the amphorae. Number 5. Artifacts of the Titanic. On the fateful evening of April 14, 1912, the Titanic hit an iceberg and sank. The unsinkable vessel that took 14,000 people to build and 900 crew members to run was lost beneath the waves. And there it sat undisturbed by human hands 13,000 feet underwater. It lay dormant until it was discovered on September 1, 1985, by Navy officer Robert D. Ballard. All these years later, thousands of artifacts have been recovered from the ship. So many it would take hours just to discuss them. But not long ago, an exhibition was set up at the Luxor Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas, displaying roughly 250 very particular items. Each of these items was retrieved from the Titanic's underwater grave. Paper money found at the bottom of the sea was recently added to the collection. A pen still in its original box, and even a wooden brush. These are random personal belongings that were brought all the way from the bottom of the ocean near Newfoundland to a casino in the desert. The Luxor even houses what's called the Big Piece, the largest recovered part of the Titanic ever. It takes up its own room and is a 15-ton, 26-foot-long, 12-foot-wide chunk of metal from the Titanic's hull on the starboard side. Number 4. 2 sunken ships. Off the coast of Caesarea, Israel, marine archaeologists have discovered a small group of ancient artifacts. Some of these artifacts date back to the 3rd century, and all of them came from the wrecks of two ships that went down in two separate periods. One of the ships was from the Roman period, the other from the Mamluk period. Researchers believe the ships were anchored and then hit by a storm, and all their treasures were spilled in the ocean. Since they were destroyed at the same place, this must have been a notoriously dangerous spot for sailors to anchor. There wasn't exactly a monumental treasure of gold and silver and gems. However, there were some extremely intriguing finds that were probably people's personal belongings. Archaeologists found a thick gold ring with a green gemstone embedded in the center. The gemstone depicts a shepherd boy dressed in a tunic and could be the symbol of the Good Shepherd. It was one of the earliest depictions of Jesus as a benevolent figure, which is most definitely the most remarkable find between the two ships. The divers also discovered hundreds of silver and bronze Roman coins and a small hoard of coins from the Mamluk period. Number 3. The gold coin. Nick Amelio was busy treasure salvaging south of Turtle Trail Beach when he came across something unbelievable. The teenager, only 17 years old, was in the water looking through sandy potholes when he found a remarkable treasure. He was only in about 10 feet of water, no more than 1,500 feet from shore, when he saw that old familiar glimmer of gold. He reached down into the sand and pulled up a gold coin worth about $10,000. If he could have traded that for cash, it would have been the quickest $10,000 anyone has ever made. The coin proved to be from the 1715 fleet. That was a group of 11 Spanish ships that got caught in a hurricane and sank, spilling a truly massive treasure into the ocean. The treasure has since dispersed because of hundreds of years of shifting sands and ocean currents, but every now and then, a piece gets close enough to the beach in Florida for a teenager to pick it out of the sand. Number 2. Junk in the River Thames. A mudlarker is a person who sifts through the mud of riverbeds looking for treasure. It's not officially a real word, but it is what these people call themselves, and it sounds fun. They go out at low tide, comb through the muddy shoreline of whichever river they're interested in searching, and look for buried treasure and ancient artifacts. One of these mudlarkers is author and expert Lara Makelem. Lara has discovered lots of interesting historical artifacts from looking through the mud of the River Thames in England. It's actually from London that the term mudlarker was born. In the 18th century, poor people would trudge along the shoreline collecting any kind of valuables they could find. Anything from dirty old nails to a piece of coal, whatever they could sell for food. The river grew to be so polluted in the 19th century that by the 1950s it was considered dead. It wasn't until just recently that the river was cleaned up and is now considered one of the cleanest in the world. Still, London's filthy history can be found washed up on the shoreline. Mudlarkers like Lara have discovered all kinds of things here, like Roman pottery, a tobacco pipe from the 1650s, a preserved wax seal from the days of King Richard III, and so much more. Number 1. Blackbeard's treasure. The Queen Anne's Revenge is currently occupied by octopuses and hungry sharks. Black sea bass, moray eels, and other fascinating marine creatures live in what was once the pirate Blackbeard's flagship. It's been sitting off the coast of North Carolina in relatively shallow water for almost 300 years. It was originally found in 1996, less than half a mile from the shore. But because of brutal South Carolina weather, a lack of funding, and an unexplainable lack of interest, not much has been done in the way of excavations. It was only a few years ago that archaeologists were able to actually confirm beyond any shadow of a doubt that this was Blackbeard's ship. Several artifacts have been brought up from the Queen Anne's Revenge since it was first discovered, but no actual treasure. When it comes to gold, underwater divers have found nothing except a small sprinkling of gold dust under an ounce. No actual treasure has been uncovered, and it's really making people wonder if there is any treasure down there to be looking for. Other than the small amount of gold dust brought to the surface, researchers have pulled up cannons encrusted with barnacles. They are currently working to bring the entire ship out of the water so that it can be restored and put in a museum. Thanks for watching! What would you do with pirate treasure? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!